Hello Sharks, this is video 5 talking about the defensive technique of poaching, and we're also going to talk about break force throws like the hammer. In this scene we have one cutter, one defender, and an unmarked handler. Let's pretend for a second that our cutter wants to go to this space. We can draw a line between our cutter and that space, and our defender should now switch over between the cutter and the space that he wants to get to. That's basic defending. Notice, however, that he's still very, very close to him in a man-to-man situation. If we want, we can drift further away from him along that line and do something called poaching. As we get further down the line, we're poaching more, and as we get closer down to the line, we're poaching less. What poaching does is it makes it a bit harder for the cutter to cut into that space because we have the lead, we have the advantage there. We've already beaten him to the space. We can also poach towards a deep space like this by standing along that line over here. We have the lead on our cutter, we've beaten him here. It's going to be very hard for him to create separation in that space. I'll show you an example of why not to poach. So here we are set up poaching our cutter. It's going to be very hard for him to get into that space because we have a lot of lead on him. But our cutter simply changes his mind and which way he wants to go and decides to take what the defender is giving him and cut the other way. Wide open for an easy pass, and now he's an unmarked handler, which is even worse. So we want to poach only when there is a mark, only when there is a break zone set up. So in this case, let's poach a little bit. Our first defender is going to drift over a little bit towards the open side and into the handler's lane. Our second defender is going to drift out even further, and our third defender is going to drift back to cover deep cuts. This makes it very, very hard for any of the cutters to get open on the open side. What we have to be wary of, though, are break force throws, such as hammers, scoobers, thumbers, high release throws. These throws are designed to make passes into the break zone. Strong handlers are capable of making passes into the break zone. They won't be pretty, and they'll take a long time in the air. But when your defender is poached that far away from the cutter, they can create lots of separation and have lots of time in the break zone to win that pass, even though it goes high up over and takes a long time to get there. Now our new handler is unmarked, wide open, and our cutters are also wide open. So both of them are going to blow to the end zone, push away the one defender, and make an easy score. So let's talk about the hammer and other break force throws, when to use them, when not to use them. Break force throws and hammers included always go into the break zone. Don't use a hammer to pass into the open zone. It is not necessary. It's extra difficulty that you don't need. So here in this open space, in the break zone, that's where we want to put our hammers. Now suppose we have a cutter in here like that with his defender. He has a lot of separation and he's in decent space, but we're not going to throw a hammer to him because the defender is nearby. Hammers take a long time in the air. They go high, they're hard to throw, they're hard to read, and they're hard to catch. That means even if the defender is relatively nearby, they can probably get there in time to make a play on the disc. We don't want to throw with a defender even remotely close. This would be the scenario where we want to throw our hammer. A wide open cutter out in space, far, far away from any circles of influence. Let's see an example of what some poaching typically looks like. Our first defender doesn't poach much at all. He stays very, very close to stack 1. Why? Stack 1 is probably only going to cut to the break zone. We don't want to stand on the break zone though, because then he's wide open for an open zone pass, an open side pass. So don't poach the break zone, don't poach the open side, just stay right on them. Our second defender creeps out a little bit into the lane, but not more than 10 feet away from his cutter. So still very close to him. Third defender doesn't really move. Fourth defender is going to drift over a little bit to prepare so that when the fourth stack becomes the fifth stack, he's already ready to stop an upline cut or deep cut. And our fifth defender is way back to stop the easy deep strike cut. There's one more trick to poaching, and if you think about it, zone defense, which we'll learn later, is essentially poaching with the entire team. In this case, we're only going to use 2 of our defenders working together to poach and do something called bracketing. We have 2 cutters here and 2 defenders. Those 2 cutters could go anywhere they want, but they're probably going to go to the open side. Now, if they're going to the open side, they could cut short or they can cut deep. We're going to have one of our defenders cover each of those options. One of our defenders is going to go short and the other one is going to go deep. They're working together, they're in constant communication. They're bracketing these 2 cutters in. So, whichever cutter goes deep is going to be guarded by our deep defender. Whichever cutter goes short is going to be covered by our short defender. Bracketing is very, very effective if you can get the teamwork down working together. I don't recommend trying to do this unless you've had a little bit more experience defending and poaching. So when should you poach? You have to remember that poaching at all times is a gamble. Anytime you poach, you're making it much more difficult for the cutter to get into one space, but much easier for the cutter to get into another. You're always gambling. So it's not always safe to poach. In fact, when in doubt, just don't do it. Just stay right on them. But when should you poach? You should poach when you know that the handler is particularly weak, that they don't have break force throws, that they don't have hammers, and that they don't have deep hucks. We can jam up the one viable lane that they do have in the hopes that they'll either throw it straight to the defense or they'll have to take drop passes. We poach when the cutter is much faster than we are. And doing that, we usually poach deep, because if the cutter is that much faster than we are, then they're going to be able to create separation, and we don't want them setting up for an easy deep huck. So we're going to poach deep to prevent them from getting the score. They're probably going to be able to get wide open for an easy upline pass, but they won't get the score. Also, another time to poach is kind of a mean, dirty tactic. If you know that the cutter you're guarding is a particularly weak handler, poach away from him. Let him get open, let him get a disc, and know then that you can lock him down. As a weak handler, he'll hopefully make a mistake. When should you not poach? In the cases of strong handlers, if they have a handler with good deep hucks, and they have a handler with easy break force throws and easy hammers, you don't want to poach, because if you drift out into that open side, it's going to be a hammer coming over the top into the break zone, and then you're in lots of trouble. You also don't want to poach when the cutter is that much slower than you. If you can run circles around the cutter, just stay right on them and lock them down. If you can stay right next to them, they'll never get the disc, and they'll be completely shut down. Like I said before, poaching is a gamble. When in doubt, don't do it. Try it in practice, try it in pickup games. Be very careful when you do it in competitive games. That's all for right now. We'll talk more about poaching, about defending, about more advanced cuts, and we'll start to get into some of our zone and formation defense in later videos. That's all for right now.